And that's it, my friend. 3 friends bound by a lifelong of friendship ultimately went their separate ways. A true allegory of life, wouldn't say Frank?
Bob then, with the delicate grace of a walrus navigating a hammock, announced,
Frank, my apologies, but nature calls. Or, as the Amish say, ich muss geh, translation, I must go to the shithouse, if you're not at all familiar with the Pennsylvania Dutch. But nonetheless, I shall return.
He then shuffled off, leaving me to ponder his ramblings. As I waited, I couldn't help but try and digest all he had told me. But like a blind man at an orgy, I was going to have to be steadfast and feel things through. After an unspecified amount of time, the bathroom doors swung open, projecting the triumphant sound of the restroom's hand blowers throughout the bar.
Dorothy! Another Bloody Mary, my dear lady.
Bob then lumbered back to his bar stool, polished off the remnants of his tomato-infused vodka. And with one long ah, continued.
My dear Frank, it just occurred to me while I was blow-drying my hands in the washroom that I unintentionally obviated past a fairly large plot point in our story.
I mutter, really?
Yes, Frank, really. Thus now, if you have another moment, I'd like to take a shot at truly completing this tale, with this part I shamefully overlooked on my part, and recount it to you.
I waved him the okay, and then he was off to the races.
Now, Mark, Chris, and Alex, after the beer-drinking competition and before the rooster chase, just by sheer poppycock chance, happened to come across a street-side palm reader of notable acclaim.
I mutter, notable acclaim?
Yes, Frank. Notable. Worthy of you and I's attention. For context, imagine you, Frank. You held everything you ever wanted to know about your fate, love life, and personality in the palm of your, hand. That's the very essence of the palm reader's mantra. You see, palmistry, it's a mystical art, practiced mainly in tourist traps and rundown plazas on the west side of town. Primarily by white-bearded Hindus adorned in abayas and sandals.
I gesture for him to proceed.
Now, Will Frank, old sport. If I recall correctly, it was Chris who suggested that they make way and dabble in these mythical arts of chiromancy. But who would go first? Ah, that was the question. Thus, after a quite vigorous game of rock, paper, scissors, it was clear. Mark would be the first. Thus, he gingerly made his way towards the tent, and let me tell you, it was a whimsical sight. Slightly worn but charming, evoking, dare I say, a sense of mystery and old-world charm. Ultimately conveying to dear Mark a deep-rooted sense of anticipation and intrigue. Now, Frank, are you at all familiar with mysticism?
Mysticism, I mutter.
Yes, right, Frank. The practice of well-experiencing, the sweet union one holds with the divine.
I can't say that I have, beyond the occasional takeout fortune cookie.
Now, Frank, let's keep the cute quips to me, but I do appreciate the effort.
Defeated, I nod in agreement.
So with warm lighting exuding from within the tent, beaconing Mark to venture in. Now it was damn well impossible to be intoxicated by the potential promises of the mystical insights one may acquire inside. The tent was abundant in dark red velvet and sassafras. Mark plopped down in the empty chair inside, then extended a hand to the man who looked like he'd been reading palms since the invention of the rotary phone. After a short introduction, the bearded man lit some rather enchanting incense, then began to study Mark's hand very, very intently. After an unspecified amount of time had elapsed, you see, the man abruptly dehanded.
Dehanded?
Yes, Frank, he removed his hand.
He cut his hand off? Oh,
No, God, no, Frank, focus. He took his hand off Mark's hand.
sorry, I get it.
Shall I continue? The man with broken English spoke. Ah, I see. A deep-seated sense of accountability avoidance. And a very specific incident involving a shattered glass surface and a fabricated narrative involving atmospheric anomalies. Mark's face flushed crimson. Look, that thermal inversion explanation was perfectly plausible. I mean, you're going to make a phone call, Mark. A very awkward phone call. And you're going to admit that your BB gun skills were The reason for this decades-old mystery. Mark put his head down, reluctantly acknowledging, and got up. Next up was Chris. The man took his hand, his expression softening into a look of genuine sympathy. Oh, Chris. I see. A whirlwind of emotions, fueled by cheap beer and competitive spirit, and a distinct aroma of charred wood. Scuttlebutts? Is it? The sacred grounds of your beer pong triumphs, but now reduced to ashes. Chris's eyes welled up with tears. You know about scuttlebutts. It was my sanctuary, my happy place, the place where I perfected the flaming scorpion beer pong shot. I swear those tiki torches were an accident waiting to happen, and the fire department never linked it back to me. He broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I miss the smell of spilled beer and burnt popcorn. I miss the late-night karaoke sessions. I miss everything. The man patted his shoulder, offering a comforting, if slightly unsettling smile. There. It was a learning experience, and perhaps a cautionary tale about the dangers of combining tiki torches and projectile ping-pong balls. Now, maybe stick to shuffleboard, and perhaps invest in a fire extinguisher. Finally, it was Alex's turn. The man took his hand, his eyes widening in surprise. You're a prankster, I see. So many to choose from. Ah, you in high school made a phone call to a vulnerable youth, pretending to be the hockey coach. Ah, yes, and it was the night after tryouts. Alex's face turned white. You chose the worst athlete you knew would not make the team, and gave him hope, phoning his parents to tell them of their son's acceptance on making the team, only to watch that poor boy attempt the following day to get on the bus to practice, only to be stopped by the real coach telling him of the true reality of the situation. I honestly don't know what to make of that, but drastically reduce your sodium intake. Thank you, come again. Alex blinked, utterly bewildered and ridden with shame. The three left the tent. Chris was still a sobbing mess, clutching a crumpled napkin. Mark, looking like he was about to confess to a string of unsolved crimes, was dialing his phone. And Alex, his face a mask of confusion and shame. Their Key West vacation, it seemed, had taken a decidedly surreal turn. And so Frank, a month later, it would be that this well-known Hindu palm reader, Mark, Alex and Chris, had procured for services that now had long been rendered, was shot dead one day.
Shot dead?
Shot dead. Yes, Frank, and not by Mark, Chris, or Alex. The palm reader, whose name was Mahadeo Jerry Bandon, had lived in Key West, Florida, enjoyed the Florida Keys' salty air and the touch of a lassie. But don't we all, Frank? Am I right? But I digress. And so, on the night he was killed, he was preparing to observe Pitri Paksha, a 15-day period when Hindus pay homage to their ancestors, followed by impromptu sultry river dance and, the classic piñata, which they traditionally fill with beer nuts and dates. Yes, Frank, dates and beer nuts. But continuing on, now there have been mixed reports on what transpired next. Some in the know believe he had been sitting in the gallery with some of his nephews and grandsons, awaiting the river dance portion of the celebration. Others believe with certainty that he had been preparing a hole in the yard. What can I say about that? The man enjoyed digging. But don't we all, Frank? Don't we all? Anyhow, a loud noise was heard, followed by a scream so horrific it would tear the slacks right off you, unless you're wearing a belt. And so family members hearing the noise frantically made their way around the house in search of the sound. And sadly, that search for Jerry Bandon led them to the bathroom, where they found him with a gunshot wound to the head. Thus, he hadn't been digging nor awaiting the river dance. Rather, he had been, doing what this poor NFL team is yet to do. Taking the Browns to the Super Bowl. Like that will ever happen. Right, Frank? But pardon me. Thus now, to this day, we don't know if someone came to steal, pillage, or plunder. But with much certainty, we do know this Jerry Bandon should very well have read his own palm. And so the investigation unfolded like a poorly scripted soap opera, with each family member spinning a new version of events. Everyone had an alibi, but none of them made any sense, like trying to untangle headphones after a long flight. What can I say, Frank? This was a case that would baffle even the most seasoned detectives. The rumors swirled around Key West like a drunken conch shell blower. A thief? A disgruntled neighbor slightly too friendly with the tiki torches? But truly, the only one who didn't make it out alive was Mahadeo himself, trapped forever in the annals of bizarre local lore. And as the sun set over the palm trees, one couldn't help but wonder if he foresaw this tragic twist, or was he simply destined to be another victim of the eccentricities of life in the Florida Keys? So Frank, there you have it. A tale of three friends bound by the inescapable shackles of friendship and the triumph of the abdominal spirit, spun a tale they would surely never forget. It was said somewhere, each one of us leaves some type of imprint on the world. And at times one does not recognize their stake they have made, that stake that permanently engraves upon the world they now or once lived. It's a beautiful thing, Frank, a beautiful thing. I know the time is late, so I'll leave you with this, the lineage of this here tale I tell, and how I came to procure it. As you already know, my name is Bob, and I acquired this true scripture, having it ultimately bequeathed to me from the previous proprietor, just as you now, well, will inherit it from me. And as such, the man I happened to inherit it from as well was not the experiencer. Rather, his name was Sir Cummerbund II, a long-time stonecrabber from Deerkey. You see, Sir Cummerbund had grown weary of his sole ownership of this illustrious tale. Thus he sought to retire it to, well, me. Hence one foggy day he took me to his cabin, poured me a brandy and narrated to me this very story I have just told you. Now, Frank, I do not envy the headache I will have when I awake tomorrow. But in my stead, rest well, and now, here in this scallywagon of a bar, I officially adorn to you, my dear Frank, the dominationship and stewardship of this tawdry tale. Be well, my friend, and if it be, I not see you again, remember our parting is not an end, just a pause you see in the debauchery of life. Now, Frank, don't you cry because it's over. Smile well, because it happened.
It was a mash of strange memories on that night in Key West. It seems like a lifetime, or at least a main era, the kind of peak that never comes again. Maybe it meant something to Mark, Chris, and Alex. Maybe not in the long run. But no explanation, no mix of words or music or memories can touch that sense of knowing that they were there and alive in that corner of time in the world. Whatever it meant. Stories are hard to know because of all the hired bullshit, but even without being sure of a story, it seems entirely reasonable to think that every now and then the energy of let's say, three friends comes to a head in a long, fine flash, for reasons that nobody really understands at the time, and which never explain in retrospect what actually happened. My thoughts on Bob and his bestowed tale seems to hang on maybe 5 or so points. Dubacori friendship, sure. Misadventure, all of it rolled up in one nicely fitting fanny pack. I think Mark, Chris, and Alex is more of a cautionary tale in a way. That being sometimes to find one's self, you first need to get well, get lost, however that may be. Naked conga, rooster wrangling, you get the picture. But lastly, and I think most important, you can't find what you already have. Just be sure to give it a nudge occasionally. You'll find it was there all along.